Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now we're in a remote part of Nevada at the somewhat ghost town of Belmont. This is one of the most picturesque and best preserved ghost towns in the state. And it really boomed in the 1860s and 1870s. And walking around here, you really get a sense of what it was like in an 1800s mining boomtown. And like any 1800s mining boomtown, this place is filled with wild stories. And later on, may have even had a connection to Charles Manson. We are currently in the middle of the state, about 45 miles northeast of Tonopah. I had mentioned that this is somewhat a ghost town. Despite the town being completely off the grid with no electric lines or water, there are a few people who live in town to this day. It's a far cry from the thousands who lived here in the 1800s, though. A rich discovery of silver was made near here in 1865, and Belmont started out as a mining camp. At first, the camp was just made up of tents, but as money started rolling in, a more permanent town sprang up. Most of the buildings were built using local materials. The first post office opened here in 1867. At its peak, Belmont had a population of over 2,000 people. There are some places that put the population at over 10,000, but that number is highly unlikely. This county as a whole didn't hit a population of over 10,000 until the 1980s. This is the old bank building, and it was built in 1868. Down here in the basement of the bank is where the town jail once was, and it was down here where an infamous act of vigilante justice was dished out. In June of 1874, two men, McIntyre and Walker, were being held in the town jail, accused of a shooting and making threats. But before they could stand trial, a masked mob decided not to wait for the law. Late one night, about 30 men stormed the jail, tied up the sheriff and his deputy, and within minutes, both McIntyre and Walker were hanged in the jail. Their deaths carried out without judge or jury. Each man had a note pinned to his back, with only the numbers 601 written on it. The 601 in the Old West meant 6 feet under, 0 trial, 1 rope. No one was ever arrested for the hangings, and afterwards one of the local newspapers did state that some of the rougher elements of town left for friendlier parts of Nevada. This pile of wood here was the Cosmopolitan, built in 1867, and it was a saloon, a dance hall, and a hotel. The Cosmopolitan closed in 1910, then the building was used on and off until the 1930s. There are a number of ruins here. I'm not sure what all of these buildings were, but this is Main Street, the commercial hub of Belmont. And it looks like one of the buildings is, in a way, still occupied here. Most of the ruins in town are on private property, so we're kind of limited in how much exploring of them we can do. But we can see a lot just by walking the streets. For a while, this was a pretty happening place. I mean, it was even big enough to have 2 competing newspapers. And check out this wall right in the middle of the window. It kind of defeats the purpose of having a window here. I'm going to have to assume the inner wall came later, but both look pretty old. Let's take a closer look here. By 1867, Belmont was important enough that it was made the Nye County seat. That lasted until 1905, when the county seat was moved to Tonopah. And here's that wall, and I'm not sure, it may have been original to the building. It looks like the window frame goes right into it. And it looks like this building had a pretty large basement. Here's a spring. Of course, the town is located where it is because of the availability of water. Long before silver mining came, this area was home to Native Americans for thousands of years. And I think I mentioned earlier that this town is completely off the grid. Everybody who lives here has to use solar or a generator, but they do have access to local water. Now, is the water safe to use? Probably not without treating it first. It's pretty hard to see, but hidden behind these trees is the Ernst House. It was built in the 1870s by George Ernst. Ernst came to Nevada in the 1860s and then moved here in the 1870s. And there's a pretty funny court case that involved him that we'll talk about once we get to the courthouse as well. And speaking of the courthouse, we could see it off in the distance through the trees as well. Unfortunately, there's no good angle to see this house, so you'll just have to take my word that there's a dilapidated house on the other side of these trees. Here's another house. This is the Leon House, and this was built in 1868. This one is still occupied, and apparently the current residents are only the third family in the house's history to own it. These ruins over here, which are unfortunately on private property so we can't get any closer, are the old schoolhouse, which was built in 1867. Time has definitely taken its toll on the schoolhouse, but I do have a picture of what it once looked like. Here's the town's crown jewel, the Belmont Courthouse. After the hanging incident that we talked about earlier, it was decided that a more substantial courthouse and jail was needed, so construction began on this courthouse in 1875, and it was completed on July 4th, 1876. They had a big celebration here in honor of the opening, as well as the United States' 100th birthday. It cost $22,000 to build, which is just over $600,000 adjusted for inflation. We always have bad luck with things not being open when we visit, so of course the courthouse is closed for restoration. In 1905, the county seat moved to Tonopah, and the courthouse was pretty much abandoned. After it was abandoned, people would often explore its ruins and write on its walls, and looking through the window here, you could still see a lot of graffiti on the walls. Legend has it that one group of visitors in 1969 was the Manson family, and that Charles Manson even carved his name in there. I've been looking through the windows to see if it's visible, but I can't find it, so I'll put a picture of it up on the screen. Of course, someone else could have carved the name into the wall after the fact, but the story goes that a woman named Rose Walter, who was in her 70s and was pretty much the town guardian, saw Manson and his group trying to camp out in the courthouse, and she told them they couldn't stay there and that there was a campground nearby, so the group left. A few days later, they came back through and thanked her for suggesting the campground and said they were headed back to their ranch in Death Valley. Later that year, Rose recognized some of the group as the people she'd run off after members of the Manson family were arrested following the Tate LaBianca murders. The building's looking pretty good for being 150 years old, but it looks like it does need a little support. I just walked around back, and here's the old jail. It's kind of crazy to think about this lady having a possible encounter with the Manson family, and then what she would have thought when she saw the news just a few months later. There was another incident here when, in 1894, the county treasurer, Adam McLean, was being investigated for embezzling $15,000, and one morning he was found dead in the courthouse, choosing poison over jail. And taking a look at this cold metal cell with no windows, you could almost see why. This would not be a fun place to stay. I was looking back here to see if there was a restroom, but I don't see one in here. Here's another look into the courthouse from the jail, and you can see the walls are just covered in graffiti. It's a shame the damage that had been done, but at least the building is now being preserved and restored. And check out the door to the second floor. I imagine there would have been a staircase here at one point. Here's the building for the Belmont Courier, one of the town's two newspapers. And this same building is the one that is second from the right in this old photo from 1868. Before the newspaper occupied this building, it was a bar. The newspaper ceased publication in 1901. And there are a few more old buildings down here. Like most mining boom towns, the boom here didn't last. By 1887, the mine started drying up, and there were some larger booms in other parts of the state, so people left. And you can see some newer looking buildings here, built on what looks like the ruins of some older ones. Around 1915 or so, new mining techniques and higher metal prices sparked a brief revival here, but it faded within a few years, and by 1940, the population here was only 28. I'm not sure what the town's current population is, but it's definitely higher than 28. There's even some new construction going on. It's pretty amazing that it's still growing despite being completely off the grid. And here's a look back down towards the courthouse. There are quite a few ruins around, and it's pretty fun just to walk around and try and picture how everything once was. This is definitely one of the best preserved ghost towns in Nevada. There are still a few active businesses in town, including this saloon, Dirty Dick's. Though, good luck figuring out its hours. We're heading over to East Belmont real quick, but here's a look back down towards Belmont. Here's the Belmont Church. This was built in 2001, but it's a replica of the original Catholic church that was here until 1906. Here with this giant smokestack, this was the site of the short-lived combination mill. This stamp mill was built in 1867, and by September of 1868, it was already closed. It had two large smokestacks, unfortunately only one of them's left, but these were built to carry the smoke and pollution downwind and away from the town. In these old stamp mills, there would be like sulfur and stuff in the smoke, so pretty bad stuff. Let's go ahead and take a look inside as well. When they built this giant mill, it was only open for about a year. Then, about a decade later, in July 1878, they remodeled it and reopened it, and it was open again until May 1879. So, less than a year once again. The smokestacks did get some more use in the 1940s, but probably not how you'd think. During World War II, pilots stationed at the Tonopah Army Air Force Base used the chimney as target practice, firing their 50 caliber weapons at it. And it is riddled with bullet holes. And it looks like we could actually get inside the chimney. Hopefully there aren't bats or it isn't filled with spider webs or something. Well, no bats or spiders yet. Looks like this might be the only wood that's left of the old mill. Most of the brick and wood here was taken and repurposed to build another nearby mill in 1915. Looking around and how big this place is, it's wild to think that it was only open for less than 2 years in total. But that's the case with a lot of these mining boom towns. A lot of stuff gets built quickly and expensively, and then the mines dry up. There's one more place in town we want to check out, but on the way there we came across this, the old Monitor Belmont Mill in the distance. There's not much left aside from a smokestack, but this stamp mill was built in 1873 and was in use until 1889. We're now at the Belmont Cemetery. The first occupants were laid to rest here in 1869. This is a pretty nice cemetery nestled in here with the juniper and sagebrush. And the hill above the cemetery is appropriately named Cemetery Hill. There are graves scattered throughout the cemetery, but these ones over here look to be on the older side. A lot of older graves in pioneer cemeteries will have fences around them, kind of as a deterrent to wild animals or grave robbers. And this headstone looks pretty old too, and sure enough, it's from the 1860s. The last digit's kind of broken off, but we know the cemetery started in 1869, so it can't be any older than that. Here are a couple more with wooden fences around them. It looks like the fences have been rebuilt at some point. They don't look all that old. But it doesn't look like there's a name on this one. And it doesn't look like there's a name on this one either. Here's the grave for Ernst, and I just realized I forgot to mention his court case when we were at the courthouse. We'll take a look around his grave and I'll tell the story now. I hope everybody's ready for some bad poetry. He owned a ranch, and he was charged with paying his grazing fees for his sheep in another county where the taxes were lower, instead of Nye County where his sheep were. The prosecutor simply read a poem to the jury. George Ernst has a flock of sheep, their fleece as white as snow. He feeds them in Nye County and taxes them in Elko. Ernst was found guilty. It's kind of interesting. There's a fence around the cemetery. But if we look to the other side of the fence, it looks like there's a number of graves on that side as well. There's quite a few all throughout the trees over there. The mountains behind the cemetery sure make for an incredible backdrop. While it was originally silver that brought people out here, it's this kind of scenery and the solitude that brings them out now. So that's our look at Belmont, Nevada. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.